So you want to make a slick intro for your YouTube channel, but you don't want to rely heavily on online presets, but you're also not that great of an animator? It's a good thing you hit this video, because me, not being a great animator, or even a good one, is going to show you how I created my very own intro for this channel, which should be playing right now. Now, before we get into this edit, I just want to say that this tutorial is not for you to learn how to do this channel's intro, verbatim, but it's for you to learn the tools and tricks that made this animation possible, and also understand that you don't have to be this great animator to do a slick channel intro, or even a good animator. I do not consider myself an animator at all. And one thing I like to do if I'm creating a logo animation such as this one is to look online to see what other people have done to get inspiration. I'll link some videos down below that I personally liked to watch when I was creating my channel intro. So check those out, and remember to have patience and don't compare yourself to these other professional channel intros, but just try to learn from them. Alright, sweet, let's get into it. So in After Effects, we have our composition with just our D-Man Films logo residing right here, and you can see it's a PNG image with nothing in the background. So the first thing I want to do is create a backdrop for our logo. So we can right mouse click in the composition right here and go to New, click Solid, and we're going to make 3 separate layers. So let's make this solid white real fast. Hit OK, OK, and then Control D twice, and you're going to have 3 separate layers of different solids. So for this top layer, I want to first create a diamond mask. And then, as you can see, we cannot even tell where the mask is because underneath we have another layer that is white as well. And for that second layer, we're going to select, right mouse click, Effect, Generate, and then Fill, and we're going to craft it into a gray color. Hit OK, and then hit T on that layer, and it's going to bring up our opacity, and we can adjust the opacity until the gray is where we want it. Now for this diamond mask that we created on the top layer, I want to just feather that out now. And when I'm feathering out masks like this, I don't like looking at the line mask that we drew, so we can just go to this right here. That's going to toggle our mask on and off, so we can click that. And basically we don't have to see those lines anymore that are very distracting. And on that top layer, if we select F, you can see that mask feather comes up. We can drag this number up until we have a nice gradient that we like, which I prefer that right there. And I know this looks so subtle. You're probably thinking, Austin, I can barely see this gradient at all. Like, what do we even do? Well, it's subtle, but it will help with a nice lens flare we'll be adding to the shot later on. So if we select all 3 of these layers, right mouse click, pre-compose, let's name it backdrop, hit OK, and then drag it to the bottom. So now that we have the backdrop, we can start animating our D-Man Films logo. So the first thing we want to do is we want to isolate each one of these shapes we have right here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different shapes. So if we go down to the layer, which is our logo, and Control D 4 times, that's going to give us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers of that logo. Now for each one, we're going to mask around a different shape of our logo. So for the top one, we can create a mask around this half of the D right here, and then we can select the one below that. We can mask around just the left column, and just do this for each shape in our logo. Okay, so you can see we have all of our masks isolating each one of the shapes in our logo. Next, we want to organize our layers by labeling each shape by what it is. Now that everything is labeled and isolated, we can get to animating. So with our layer selected, we want to hit R to bring up rotation, select the stopwatch to create a keyframe, hit S to bring up scale, select the stopwatch to create a keyframe, and hit P to bring up position, select the stopwatch to bring up a keyframe. That was a repeat. Now with that layer selected still, we can hit U, and we can now see all the 3 keyframes we have created. The petition. Now with this animation, we want the logo to compress and then explode. This small compression is just a small little detail before the explosion, so it's not just the logo and boom. So on this layer, let's move a few frames ahead, and let's take the shape and now compress it in. When we're moving the shape like this, I like to hold down Shift. It allows us to move the shape on the flat plane, so we can shift it to the right as if it's compressing in on itself. Right there looks good. And we can move further ahead in the timeline and move our shape outwardly for the explosion, which will be around there. Now if we play through right there, you can see, whoa, it's moving way further than what we keyframed it. We did not move it that far into the logo. So why is it doing that? You see, with the keyframes in After Effects, we can see this path that it's created for the keyframe. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to smooth out the path of the keyframes we've created. See, we have a keyframe right here for the position, and the second one is right here. And it's doing this curve to smooth out the movement between those two. But silly After Effects, we don't want it to be smooth right there. We want it to go straight in. So we need to tell After Effects to do that. So if we select this second keyframe right here, right mouse click and go to Keyframe Interpolation, and then we can go, you can see it says Auto Bezier. I really hope I pronounce it right. Select the drop down window and just click linear instead of auto. Hit OK, and now we can see that it just goes from keyframe to keyframe. So if we hit play, you can see it goes in and out. Now clearly the timing on this is not good, but we can always adjust. So let's select all three of these keyframes, right mouse click on them, Keyframe Assistant, and click Easy Ease. And now let's compress this first one in until we get a nice timing for this compression movement. So just 2 frames past the first keyframe, I think, is a nice magic spot. If we hit play, I think the speed of which it compresses in looks great. So now let's adjust this second one until we get a nice speed from that one. And right there looks good. You can see I also adjust the position of our shape. Instead of being all the way out here, I just like to move it a little closer. And if we hit play, we can see that that right there looks pretty solid. Now, if we look at these 2 keyframes right here, these keyframes represent when our shape starts moving out and away from the other shapes within our logo. So the scale and rotation, that's when we want those aspects to start working. So we can select those 2 keyframes, drag them to where the second keyframe starts, and then drag it to the end here of our third keyframe. We can scale up where we desire, and we can rotate how we want it to rotate. And then again, select all these, right mouse click, Keyframe Assistance, Easy Ease. And if we hit play right there, we can see we get this nice compress in and explode out as it's beginning to rotate away. So now we need to progress this movement to hit this slow-mo moment. And what we're going to do with that is we're just going to move further down the timeline and then barely adjust our rotation. Right there looks good, and then just drag the shape just a little bit further out. And you can see again, After Effects has tried to compensate with this curve it's trying to make to create a more smooth movement between the keyframes. We don't want that, so let's right mouse click, again, Keyframe Interpolation, and then hit linear. I do want to turn off these keyframes from being Easy Ease, so if we just select both of them, hold down Control and click, that will do the trick right there. And the reason I want to do that is I want it to be in slow-mo, but then when we get to back to full speed, I don't want it to slowly go back to full speed, but just instantly click back into it. And with these keyframes, if it's on Easy Ease, it's going to ease back into the full speed, which I don't want. You may want that. Again, that's up to you. It's all just a preference thing. So from these keyframes, we can progress further, and now we want it to bounce off the wall right here. So the first thing we want to do is adjust the rotation, because if we adjust the position, like, okay, we want it to bounce off the wall right there, but then if we needed to keep on spinning, you can see, okay, if we wanted to spin this much, we have to adjust the position again. So the first thing to do is just adjust the rotation. Just adjust. So let's continue to rotate it around. There, it looks pretty solid. And then move its position right to the edge of the frame. And we can move a couple frames further, adjust the rotation, and again, move the object where you prefer. And for this last part, I want it to bounce off this corner right here and go flying back to where it originally was. So what we can do is we have this position keyframe at the very beginning, which I guess you could say represents our controlled position of which our logo needs to get to and start at. So we can click on it, hit Control C and then Control V to copy it further down here. And then as well, we have our scale and rotation keyframes. We can copy those as well. And now you can see we have our shape right back at the beginning. The issue we have now is when it hits this top portion right here on these keyframes, it needs to continue to rotate counterclockwise. But since we copied and pasted the rotation setting, it is actually rotating clockwise now, going back to where we were. So we can adjust that just by going to the rotation. You can see it says 0 times and then 0, 0, which is the amount of degrees in which it's rotating. So we can keep it at 0 because that's the angle in which the shape is at. We can change this other 0, which represents the amount of times it's going to rotate, to a -1. And that's going to allow it to continue. As you can see here, when it hits, it continues now to rotate counterclockwise and then finishing right where it started. So if we play through, you can see it explodes, slow-mo, and then speeds back through and lands. Now the timing of the keyframes are not all there yet, but we have all the keyframes that we need. Now it's just about going through and adjusting those keyframes to get the perfect timing for what looks natural. So when the keyframes get to a place that you like, we can watch through it, and that right there looks fine. Now here's a good point of what I was talking about when the small minor details helps with creating a more slick logo animation. So when it comes to the end here, you can see the D just stops, so it goes through, bounce, and just stops. Well, instead of it just stopping, how about we have it just shift a little bit as it stops, so you get this nice little boop, small. So if we move just 2 keyframes forward from our final keyframes we had, and we just shift the object over and then go 3 keyframes ahead and then copy and paste our control keyframe representing where it needs to end up, and then just adjusting those keyframes until something looks natural. You can see now our animation ends like this. Very subtle, but we love it. So the next thing that we want to do is probably one of the most important things, maybe, I don't know. But with this layer, we want to make sure that motion blur is selected on. So right here, we want to select motion blur and make sure it is enabled right here so we can see it working within our timeline. And what that will do is bring motion blur within the movement of our object. So if we play with the motion blur, you can see everything is looking very smooth and very slick. I'm gonna just keep saying slick in this tutorial, it needs to happen. So with this technique that we use on this D-shaped layer is the same technique that we use with every single other layer on this logo. So once we're done applying those steps to all the different objects of our logo and then pre-composing all 5 of those layers, we are left with this explosion logo. Now, the next thing we need to do is create a paint layer for the tentacles that are going to reach out of the logo and pull our little falling shape right back up. So with our logo layer selected, we want to right mouse click, go to open and then open layer. Go up to our paintbrush tool, go over to the paint window, make sure you change the color to black. Make sure that the duration is a single frame so we can create a new shape frame by frame. And then with the page down and page up buttons on our keyboard, we can go frame by frame back and forth and begin to draw an animation for how we want these tentacles to reach out. And I want to reiterate, even if you're not a good animator, this is not a complicated animation. We can start just by creating a little blob right on the corner here, okay? And then go the next frame, you can see it disappears, and then we can create that blob reaching out a little bit further. So if we go frame by frame, you can see the animation I've done here. And just to note, I did do this very quickly and made it purposely pretty rough just to show how easy it is to still pull off some simple, cool animation. But if we play through, we can see doesn't look so bad. I think it looks pretty cool. So we would just do that 2 more times to create those 3 tentacles reaching out and grabbing the shape. Okay, so the next aspect that we're gonna add is the animated explosion at the beginning. Now this I did not create myself, but it comes from Motion Factory. And with Motion Factory, they provide these free plug-in animations that you can use throughout After Effects. Now you can see we have these options right here for different type of animations, and we can click explosions, and then we can scroll down and find an explosion that works for us. So this one right here works just fine, so we can click create. And what it's going to do is it's going to bring that animation into its own composition while also putting it into the composition that we were just in. So let's take the explosion layer, put it in between the backdrop and our logo. And so with this explosion, I also want an energy type beam coming down and causing the explosion. So if we click on the energy options, we can see this 4th option right here. It looks great, so we can hit create again. Let's again make sure we move our layer underneath the logo, and we can see here as we scrub through, it's obviously far too big and we're missing the actual impact is way below our logo, so we can just scoot it up right here and scale it down a little bit. Play through, right there looks great. We can put our explosion right back in, make sure our explosion goes on top of the laser that we just added, and now we're left with this. And for the final thing that we're going to use from Motion Factory is a water element, and there's one that splashes across the screen right there. We want to hit create. Now you can see with this layer we have this blue water flying past our screen, and we're going to use that to transition from the white background to our black background with the white colored logo. So with this water animation, we want to double click so we can open it up into its own composition, and I actually want to change the color of this bright white we're seeing. I want to change it to actually black. So if we go to here, the color number 1, and if we switch that around, we can see that's the proper color that we want to change. We can move it down to black, hit OK, and then go back to our main composition, right mouse click, go to Effect, Keying, and we're going to add Extract, and that's going to allow us to key out the black from the animation just by adjusting the black point right here. Now right mouse click on our animation, go to Effect, go to Stylize, and click Find Edges. Then with Find Edges, select the invert option to make it all black. Next right mouse click, go to Effect, Color Correction, Hue and Saturation. And with the hue and saturation, we can adjust what colors we actually want to have with this animation. And again, right mouse click on the layer, go to Effect, Stylize, Glow. Bring your threshold to 90, put the radius at 35, and the intensity at 1.5. And then finally on this layer again, right mouse click, Effect, go to Stylize again, and then go to CC Glass. And with the surface, we want to change the softness to 10. And if we scrub through, we can see this animation that was just blue water now has a more metallic-y, thick type feeling to it with these nice neon colors. So now to get that change of the background from white to black, first thing we want to do is scrub through. As soon as our logo is covered right there, we can take our logo layer, Control-Shift-D to split it, and then right mouse click on that layer, Effect, Channel, Invert, and that is going to, if we solo the layer, we can see now that our logo now is white instead of black. And with our backdrop selected, we want to keyframe a mask in that follows this water animation crossing the screen. So you can see if we play through, the backdrop is visible, and as our animation comes in, the backdrop now is gone. So last thing to do with this part of the effect, just right mouse click on the composition, just go to New and then Solid, and then create a black solid, hit OK, and just put that at the very bottom. Let's bring this solid layer to start at the very first keyframe of our mask for the backdrop, and then if we play through, you can see white to black just like that. So the final thing that we're going to do to this animation involves something that was paid for. It's the Video Copilot's optical flares, and we are going to use those at the beginning here for the explosion and the laser. If we right mouse click on our composition, go to New and then Adjustment Layer. Let's bring this adjustment layer right above the explosion and let's rename it to Explosion Flare. Did not spell explosion right. And if we right mouse click, go to Effect, Video Copilot, Optical Flares, and then in Optical Flares, click Options. We're going to go to the Presets, we're going to go to Pro Presets, and we're going to scroll through and look for this Glass Preset Lens Flare, which is right here, scratch glass, hit OK. Turn our adjustment layer to Add, drag it down here, and then change the color of the lens flare to something more that matches the color of the explosion. And now we're just going to keyframe the brightness. So right at the start of the explosion, we want the brightness to be 0. So let's keyframe it, change the brightness to 0, then scrub through right here when we get the explosion at full scale, change the brightness to 100, and then go pretty further down into the shot and then change the brightness again back to 0. Now that leaves us with this nice glow flare with the explosion and a nice fade out. So that's it. That is literally all I did for this channel's intro. I hope that you are now inspired to go create your own channel intro or outro or animation, however you see it. And if you do, make sure you send me a link. I would love to see it, and I hope to see you in the next one. If you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that bell notification so you don't miss anything. You know the gist. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one.